David Davis, the former Brexit Secretary, joins us in the Daily Tea studio. We've just been watching Rishi Sunak's statement. What's your immediate reaction, David?
Surprise, first off. I mean, I had assumed that we would go for an autumn election, give them enough time for the improvements in the economy to sharpen people's pockets, all those sorts of things. But, I can see where he's going. And it's by no means an irrational choice. We've got a government, the whole 14 years of it, not just the last year or two, which has faced, 4 once-in-a-generation events, if you count in the tail end of the crash, which wasn't fixed when we took over. Brexit, obviously, pandemic, war in Europe. Those are at least once-in-a-generation, some are once-in-a-century events. And the government's being measured against how it dealt with that. That's what he talked about at the end. And so, I think what he's trying to do there is to
setting your alarm there for the PM statement, David, I can hear. Carry on.
Calling you.
That's my staff trying to tell me what's actually happened.
Carry on.
So I can see what he's doing. He's setting up and saying, look, we dealt with this, we dealt with it properly, and Starmer couldn't have. That's in essence where I think that's going. And it's not a foolish policy at all. Actually, it's not a foolish strategy at all. Because, you can look back and you say, what did Starmer want? Starmer wanted more lockdowns, What did Starmer do on Ukraine? Nothing, the crash, well, bluntly, it was on their watch. So, you go through all these things, and on Brexit, they don't have an opinion at all. So I can see where he's going. I can see the argument. It's a gamble, because in the polls, we're behind. There's no pollers in the lead I'm aware of, but it's a gamble, but it may be a smart gamble.
Do you worry, David, that just like Theresa May did when she announced to the surprise of the public an election, it can seem like panic, particularly when most of the narrative has been about hold till the autumn, the economic news can only get better, we're likely to have interest rate cuts, inflation is probably going to ease more significantly than it has, growth could stay on the pace that it is at the moment. How will the public view this when some might describe it as having the whiff of trying to cut and run to get over the line because you're so worried about the destruction ahead?
Well, any Prime Minister is in a no-win in these circumstances, because if he waits until November, December, it'll be hanging on till the last minute. Either way, you can't win that. It doesn't sound like panic to me at all. I mean, in fact, you cite May. I was in the cabinet at the time, and May didn't go out of panic. She went because she thought she had a 100-seat lead coming her way, and then she made such a mess of the election campaign, it didn't happen. But that's also a reminder of something, and that's that these things can turn around. At that point, we had a 20-point lead, and so they can turn around. Now, normally what happens, that election was actually an exception to the rule, but normally what happens in election campaigns where the government's running is the government tends to recover by about 9 or 10 points. Sometimes, 1992, we recovered by 12 points. Now, if you look at the local election, recent local elections, of course they were very gloomy. But I don't know if you saw the Rowlings and Thrasher assessment. Well, Labour only 7 points or so ahead. Now, that was rubbish by other pollsters because it didn't include Scotland, quite rightly, OK? But it did indicate a lead of more like 10% than 20%. So that's in fighting territory. That's recoverable. That's winnable.
Having said that, David, is Conservative Party campaign headquarters ready for this? Some seats haven't been reselected yet. You've got the starting gun has been fired 6 weeks. There was complaints about the Theresa May campaign being a couple of weeks too long. Perhaps you have caught Reform out. Perhaps you've caught Nigel Farage out here because he needs to immediately decide what he's doing. UK politics versus US, it seems. But, I mean, are you ready? Are you ready in your seat? You've got the activists ready to go?
These days there are very few activists, actually.
Well, that's a problem, though, isn't it?
But that's always the case. That's not. I don't see that as a problem. I mean, ironically, in general elections, of course, the candidate's important, but they're not the driver. My seat will be won by the Conservative Party, I hope, by the Conservative Party, not principally by David Davis. David Davis will make a few thousand votes difference, he hopes, but he won't make 20,000 votes difference. So it's mostly about, now more importantly, is the organisation in CCHQ. Now I'm assuming that they've been preparing for some time for this, one would hope so. You're right, we catch out reform. I suspect many of my colleagues are more worried about reform than anything else. I'm not sure how real that really is, but certainly it's the view of a lot of my colleagues. So no, I don't think that's a problem. I think that'll be all right. And also bear in mind, I mean, modern campaigns are 90% air war, 10% ground war. And it was because Theresa May lost the air war that we didn't win that election.
David, just tell us what that means, air war and ground war. We'll probably hear a lot of that in the next few weeks.
You will. Everybody get bored with this.
But give us
the ground war is knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, and so on. Now, harsh truth is the Conservative Party 50 years ago was the leader in the ground war. It had millions of people to go out on the ground and so on. That's not true anymore. I mean, we've got about 100,000 members or a bit more than, and quite a lot of them are not youngsters anymore. So the leafleting campaign is not so powerful. Only about 15% of people read leaflets these days as well, probably less. That's from two elections ago. They're all on social media. So the electronic war, if you like, on television, radio, social media will be much more important than it was when I first became an MP.
Isn't it a worry, though, David, because the Conservatives have never got the domination of social media. Social media is largely left-leaning, and therefore you're lagging behind in those stakes anyway.
I think it depends which bit you're talking about. I mean, look, if we were hoping to win this battle on Twitter, we wouldn't be in a good position because it's left-leaning, as you say. Quite a lot of Facebook's not Facebook. A lot of localised social media is very important these days, and it's read by locals about what's going on, whether there's been a new bridge built in the village or new schools open or whatever it might be. Or people complaining about not getting a GP's appointment. I mean, it's all those sorts of things. So that works. But I'm not worried about the organisational aspect of it. The thing that I'm going to be looking for, if you like, in the first few weeks is how they phrase the battle. We've just been talking about framing it as how would they deal with these really big events. In a way, Sunak's speech last week was about that. This was a dangerous world, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So that's framing it that way. And if they manage to successfully frame it that way, that works very much to our advantage because you've got a Labour Party that's basically not had any challenges for 14 years. And they're relying on that. They're saying the minimum possible there, and this is straight out the Blair playbook. So they're doing all of that, and we've got to say, well, what would they be like in a real fight, in real trouble, dealing with a real economy and so on.
I was at dinner at the Conservative Party conference last autumn with two of your cabinet colleagues, and I said, if you were up against Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, there would be no hope of a fight back from this far behind in the polls. This is going to be an election, isn't it, about the undecideds and the persuadables, because it appears to us, I think, Camilla, we've discussed this, the polls are soft. They're not. This does feel, well, to many commentators, more 1992 than it feels 1997. Has that got to be where you're heading for?
Yes, of course. I mean, when I walked out of Downing Street to go to fight the, because I was a whip and I was in number 12 Downing Street, to go and fight the 92 election. It was my first election as an MP, right? My second election, but my first general election as an MP. And the chief whip said to me, clear your desk, we're not coming back. We all thought we were beaten, so we all, and the media did, and Labour did, everybody did. I got on the doorstep, and I'm going to clean up the language slightly from my Yorkshire constituents, but it was to the effect of, I suppose I'm going to have to vote for you. You don't bloody deserve it. I've cleaned it up, and that's what it was. That they didn't really think we'd done a great job, frankly, in '92, but they certainly weren't persuaded of Kinnock. So in that sense, it's very, very similar, and it was true from day one. I mean, a lot of people put it down to Kinnock's bad speech. It wasn't.
At Sheffield, yes.
It wasn't
we're all right.
It wasn't. So, and that was a 12-point recovery. Now, it didn't happen by itself. Some of this is simply people making up their mind for real rather than answering a website or a telephone question. And making up your mind for real is different, right? And particularly in this sort of environment, if you look at all the by-election losses, and God knows we've had lots of by-election losses, they're all 35% type turnouts, 35-40% turnouts. Compare that with 91, when we lost Ribble Valley with a 71% turnout. They really were saying, we don't want you, right? This is people sitting on their hands. And so whoever galvanises them to come out and vote because they actually want something will win this, I think.
Is Sunak a good galvaniser?
I was going to say, do you think I was going to say, Kamal, while we talk amongst ourselves, I want David to have a look at who's pinging into his phone.
Yes. Who are they? What
and
are people saying?
Give us a little bit of an insight of from what
live intel. Very good point.
I'm just wondering.
Is Sunak a galvaniser?
Well, obviously the campaign shtick is going to be you're safer with Sunak, and I was wondering whether the
alliteration as well. Which
good. Well, I mean, you could say that for Starmer as well.
Straight away.
I love that. I mean, I'm happy to write their slogans for them if they like. And I'm wondering what the good people of Halton, Price, and Howden would think if is Rishi Sunak an electoral asset for you up there? Would you take him up onto the doorstep?
Yeah, well, because it's Yorkshire, and he's a Yorkshire MP and so on. But yeah, I mean, I've got I've got a comparatively middle class constituency. It's the north of England, but it's not red wall, it's not blue wall either, and it's middle class, fairly thoughtful. They're quite hard to provoke, but they will do what happens in all these elections. And you listen to some of my colleagues, they'll have you believe that this is an election going to be decided by immigration, boats. Like, no, it isn't. In 2005, I was the Shadow Home Secretary, right? 85% of the public said in polls that immigration was the most important issue, right? And we had a 35-point lead on immigration. And what did we do? We got a half-point improvement in our poll. And why was that? Because people they complain about immigration, but they're worried about their taxes. They worry about their cost of living. They worry about the health service. They worry the things that affect their families. And in that respect, my constituency is absolutely bang on the nail. That's what it is. It's what's right for my family and me in the next 5 years. And it comes back to this issue that what Sunak is trying to do is frame that question and say there's a lot of threats out there. Do you trust these people who are completely untested, or do you trust me? And it's in that sense, it's quite clever. But it will be about economics.
What's on your phone,
What's on your phone, David?
It's a load of journalists. It's a load of journalists asking me what I think.
Come on,
well, you're telling us. Brilliant.
A flavour of the WhatsApp group?
Huh?
A flavour of Tory WhatsApp groups?
I never watch WhatsApp.
We've tried our best, Kamal, haven't
David, thank you so much for coming in. What a great! We'll be seeing you a lot, I assume, over the next 6 weeks.
I suspect you will. Whether I'm going to get sort of conscripted to do the national round. I mean, bear in mind in 2019, I probably only spent 5 days in my constituency. I did at least 17 swing seats.
Wow.
You'll always have a seat, a swing seat or otherwise, in the Daily T-shirt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Lovely to see you.